This teleconference is made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Welcome to our Choices and Challenges 10th Anniversary Forum. The Choices and Challenges series began here at Virginia Tech a decade ago to examine the human questions, the ethical, social, legal, and political concerns that result from dramatic new developments occurring in science and technology. Over the past 10 years, we have considered a wide variety of topics, ranging from breakthroughs in science that allow us to explore the features of a single gene, to advances in technology that enable us to explore the outermost regions of our universe. In today's program, we turn our attention to the advances that have been made in computer and communications technologies, advances that now permit computers to be connected to each other along vast fiber optic superhighways reaching throughout the world, that reduce the communication time from anywhere in the world to mere fractions of a second, that can open up vast stores of information with the click of a key, and that can link human beings together in a new kind of community, an electronic community, an electronic village. Virginia Tech's own community of Blacksburg, Virginia, is now the location of a pilot study, one of the first of its kind, to see how an electronic village might function. In dramatic new ways, the electronic village can connect teachers with students and parents, physicians with their patients, employers with their employees, and citizens with their government representatives. What opportunities does it bring? What problems or concerns can it create? What do we need to do to deal with the difficulties we see now, and how can we act now to avoid others before they arise? Our panel today will help us probe the possibilities and problems that an electronic village may bring to the different environments in which we live, and help us determine what living in an electronic village may do to our quality of life. And now, the moderator of today's program, Paul Evan Peters.
Good day. I'm Paul Peters, and I'm your moderator for today's program. We're gathered in this teleconference to explore one of the most interesting and significant questions facing our nation as we make our final preparations for the next millennium. The 21st century is just 5 years away, and far and wide, people are dreaming about and worrying about what computers and telecommunications will mean to their lives and to the lives of their children, family, friends, and neighbors. There is a growing sense that access to data networks and digital resources will be as important to economic and social well-being in the 21st century as access to trade routes and natural resources have been in the 19th and 20th centuries. Instead of just living in agricultural hamlets or industrial towns, it seems certain that each of us will soon be living as well in one or more electronic villages. These electronic villages will be defined by and linked together by information highways. We will use these highways to transport our educational, entertainment, and many other types of raw materials and finished goods and services. These information highways will likely make the impacts that the telephone, radio, television, and personal computers have already had on our lives look trivial by comparison. Governments at all levels and businesses of all sorts in the United States and around the world are now hard at work at building these highways. And a global network of networks known as the Internet is a functioning prototype of things to come. Today, we want to help you to think about and to talk about what these developments will mean to you and to the people around you. For instance, what do these developments mean for how our children will be educated and for how all of us will become a nation of lifelong learners? What do these developments mean for our jobs and for our relationships with our bosses, co-workers, and customers? What do these developments mean for our health and wellness and for our relationships with our physicians and other care providers? What do they mean for our democracy and for our relationships with our governments, our elected officials, and public servants? And finally, What do these developments mean for our fundamental rights and responsibilities under the Constitution and before the law? We want you to get involved in the social construction of the information highway and to provide you with some of the tools you'll need to do that work. We may have to rely upon technical, financial, regulatory, and public policy specialists to see to the physical construction of the information highway, but all of us have a critical role to play in its social construction, and we are gathered together today to explore that role. Our guides for the next couple of hours are 6 experts who have been hard at work in these pursuits since before most of us had even heard the term fiber optics. It is my distinct pleasure to now introduce you to them and to moderate our discussion this afternoon. Our first guide is Steve Acker, who's Associate Professor in the Department of Communication at Ohio State University. His major research interests are in the design of new media technologies and in their implementation for innovation in education and other organizational settings. Last quarter, Steve taught a course on the topic of this symposium to 23 undergraduates, all of it using computer networks, all of it involving computer novices, and across the 10 weeks they printed exactly 23 pieces of paper, the syllabus for the course. Our second guide today is Brian Pfaffenberger, who's an anthropologist in the Division of Technology, Culture, and Communications at the School of Engineering in the University of Virginia. And he specializes in examining the effects of computers in the workplace and in business and on the democratization of information. At your bookstore near you, he's the author of 2 very well-regarded new books, Internet in Plain English and the World Wide Web Bible. Our third guide is Donald Lindberg, Director of the National Library of Medicine in the Department of Health and Human Services of our federal government, and he was the first director of the National Coordination Office for High Performance Computing and Communications. He was a founding member and the first president of the American Medical Informatics Association. Our fourth guide is Joe Shoemaker, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff for U.S. Congressman Rick Boucher. Congressman Boucher has taken the lead on telecommunications and information infrastructure issues in Congress by authorizing legislation which will advance the nation's information superhighway, and he'll be joining us by videotape in a little while. Joe has worked for Congressman Boucher for 6 years on Capitol Hill. Our fifth speaker is Deborah Johnson. Deborah is Professor of Philosophy in the Department of Science and Technology Studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She's the author of the very highly regarded book which is published by Prentice Hall on computer ethics, which entered its 2nd edition in 1994. And she has a new anthology coming out in the near future with Helen Nesselbaum that, in fact, it just came out, and it's on the subject of computer ethics and social values, and it's also published by Prentice Hall. And our final guide today is Mark Rotenberg. Mark is the director of the Electronic Privacy Information Center in Washington, D.C. He specializes in privacy issues and also on issues of equity and access to technology. He's a tournament chess player, and he's a former director of the Washington office of the Computer Professionals of Social Responsibility. Our format today is we will spend approximately the next hour hearing from each of our speakers in turn. Each of them will offer us about 5 minutes of opening remarks. I'll have the opportunity to ask a follow-up question, and some of our panelists may join in that process. At 1:35, we will take a 15-minute break, and at 1:50, we will get back together and have the opportunity to engage in an interactive discussion with folks here in the audience and with all of you out there across the 300 and some sites that are linked via this teleconference. Let me tell you right now, even before we start the first presentation, what phone numbers, fax numbers, and electronic mail IDs you should use so that you can feel free to get your questions to us as soon as they occur to you. If you would like to submit a question to this conference, you can do that by telephone by dialing 1-800-222-9703. That's 1-800-222-9703. You're welcome to fax your questions to 1-703-231-3746, 1-703-231-3746, or you can email your questions to choices@vt.edu. Choices, C-H-O-I-C-E-S, at vt.edu. So we're now ready to hear from our first guide in today's discussion, and that's Steve Acker. Steve?
Thank you, Paul. As a communication professor, I've been introduced as the guy that can talk out of both sides of his mouth. And as some of my students love to tell me, be the only one listening to the conversation. I can't break that habit, but I sure hope that you'll join us in this conversation today because it requires many, many points of view. I'd like to start with one of our futurists writing in the past, and that author is H.G. Wells, and the work is a 1902 book in which he describes the credible city, a place where people would want to live. Now, the size of the credible city depended on how people traveled in it. If the people walked, it could be about 2 miles in radius. If they had horses, you could travel for 8 miles. And if you had a streetcar, maybe 30. And the thing about these distances is it is about how far you could travel in 1 hour to have face-to-face communication. So even today, our city is about 50 miles in radius to be considered credible. Now, of course, even in 1902, all that moving around came at a cost. There was dirt, there was dust, there were narrow, clogged streets. You were sitting in traffic. You wasted time, you were frustrated. So as early as 1914, that venerable magazine, Scientific American, described the picture phone. And by 1939, we show one at the New York World's Fair. Now, it didn't matter that your business partner in Washington, D.C. was a blurry, shadowy haze of blue, and that you were so hot that you couldn't stand more than a hello before you had to run out of the picture phone booth. And don't let it bother you that at that time there was no mention made of this technological innovation for education. Now today we're sitting around this table facing TV cameras, and it's still pretty hot, these lights. And now we're talking about the global village and how and whether the size of that credible city has changed. My focus is education, but it cannot be pulled from the overall context of life, from the work, the politics, the health care, and the broad social issues of privacy and equity that this entire panel is going to talk about. Because you see, the promise and the threat and the choice and the challenge is how we integrate our education, our leisure, our work, and our home in our time. Think back to our credible cities. This job of the cities was to coordinate and place business, education, leisure, and home activities of us as citizens. From the time of the Industrial Revolution, we've been busy putting these activities in different places, and people go to work. People go home, children go to school, and we all go out for leisure activities. Today, the telecommunication superhighway has improved, and the interstate highways are beginning to crumble. And we talk about activity going with the person rather than moving people around in space. So I can be here in the Donaldson Brown Center. I can manage the class at the same time that I'm teaching at Ohio State. I can talk to my 8-year-old daughter about the soccer field that your drill area would work so nicely for. And I can revisit the internet-based statistics on the NIT champions here at Virginia Tech University. And you see, this is terrific for me because I'm lucky. I've got lots of control in my life. This rich telecom environment makes me tetherless rather than tethered. But take away that self-control and give it to somebody else. Give it to my boss, give it to my teacher. And under these circumstances, the opposite of untethered occurs. And instead, I'm enchained. So we're moving into cities without place, without known limits of credible distance, and it can go either way. This quality of education could dramatically improve in the electronic villa. Through the interconnected network of home, work, school, students could use their community resources to find and accelerate the learning opportunities. At early ages, students could go to the office They could be the mayor. They could meet the elderly in their community. They could experience the agora of politics, the common meeting grounds for debate. And in this electronic villa, they would escape the over-organized childhood syndrome, where the lockstep curriculum following standardized tests takes away their educational opportunities. And in this electronic villa, in my vision, there would never be more than one computer for every 3 students, so that the pleasures of collaboration over lessons situated in modern life could take place. They would talk. And if this comes to pass, we'll find the MIT prediction that the average age of the internet user will fall from 26 to 15 by the year 2000. And the trend of personal computer sales outselling color televisions, first established in 1994, will continue, but never to the point of television sets, where we have now more TVs in our home than we have children. On the other hand, we could enter the evil age and tighten the tether that holds society. Currently, households with incomes of $50,000 or more are 5 times more likely to own the PC, 10 times more likely to have access to online services. The children of college graduates are 3 times more likely to have a PC than the children of non-college graduates. And couple that with their neighborhood schools, in which the same statistics apply. Those with access to the internet come from the wealthy and the educated communities. In this electronic evil age, we see information locks in place that open only to allow information to move one direction, and only at the convenience of those who can pay the cost of bandwidth in the electronic village. So to return to our theme, most of what we feel about the promise of our credible electronic village will be based on our sense of autonomy. Those who control their time will rejoice in the electronic village, and those who do not control their time will lose that buffer of space between their education, their work, their leisure, and their home. They will lose the last good place to hide from those in control. In education, we need to give students a sense of control, and we do that through a mastery of the tools, a sensitivity of how to use their time, and a capacity to linger in surprise encounters. And we must have health. We must have ergonomic responses to physical and cognitive demands of the technology. Otherwise, we've crossed space to steal time, making a city which in the end is not credible for those who lack control. Will we reach the electronic villa or the evil age? Who knows? We probably are governed more by chaos theory than by social planning. But still, there's hope in the dialogue between technology and society. Last week, I was writing about the overworked American using this PowerBook while I watched my son's soccer game. And during the final spell check, the PowerBook highlighted its own name and suggested that I change PowerBook at the soccer game to Powerboat at the soccer game. And although it really mixed the metaphor, at least it too sensed the need to separate work, education, and leisure. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Something I'm interested in that I wonder, I'd appreciate if you'd talk about for a couple minutes more is if the learning community, the learning communities, the schools that we have in this new environment are geographically dispersed, where will the locus of traditional community values be found?
Ooh, good question. What happens when we can't reach out all the time and bring this information, these other people into our communities electronically? Who decides what should come in and what should stay out? And the way the internet's set up, it's the individual. It is not the community per se. How that information used is where the community, I think, can impose its sense of social value.
Thank you. Those of you out there in the teleconference and here in this audience, Steve would love to have your questions along this line or anything else having to do with schooling and lifelong learning. Our next guide today is Brian Pfaffenberger, and Brian, you're up next.
What's a quality workplace? Well, here's what I'd like. Besides the usual stuff, good salary and benefits, not too much paperwork, not too far from the water cooler. I want to have the tools that I need to do my job well, the information I need to do my job, trust that I can do my job without, thank you, being constantly monitored. This is a respect issue for me. And perhaps most of all, the ability to close the door on my job so that it doesn't swallow up my whole life. What's the impact of advanced computer networking and the internet and the information superhighway to come on workplace quality? Well, here's the news. It's both very, very good and very, very bad. I'll start with the good news first. Computer networking can play a big role in helping you grow professionally. Imagine an electronic social field of people just like you all over the country and indeed all over the world who are coping with the same issues you're coping with in your professional or career activity. You can, using a variety of tools that exist right now, such as electronic mail and electronic news groups, you can ask questions like, does anyone know how to solve this problem? You can find knowledge resources. Is there any data anywhere that can help me on this? You can get help and support. And yes, you can even find jobs. Right now, there are more than 800 jobs advertised every day on the internet. Computer networking can empower employees to do their job better as well. In the old management style, information flowed up from an employee to a manager, and then across to another manager, and then down to an employee in some other department. With computer networking, information can flow directly between employees. People with knowledge can make it available quickly and to the people who need it. This changes organizations for the better if management doesn't fight it. Today's companies need flexible teams, not hierarchies, and computer networking can do a great job in getting the people talking who need to be talking, engineers to marketing, finance to manufacturing, and so on. Computer networking can cut time and conquer distance, too. News, reports, and knowledge circulate almost instantly throughout an organization. Teams don't have to be in the same location. They can be spread all over the country, or for that matter, all over the world. There can be tremendous payoffs in quality and productivity if computer networking is used right in this way. International Data Corporation found that they received 179% return on their investment after installing a computer network. But it requires understanding management. Managers have to be willing to let information bypass them. Last benefit here is you can work at home through telecommuting. Working at home helps the environment. It cuts down on pollution, cuts down on smog and traffic, and you can be there for your family as well while you're working. Okay, now for the bad news. You can work at home. I know, I just said that that was good news. But workaholics, beware. All your work tools are right there sitting on your home office desk. The job that ate your life might in fact do so through a home computer if you don't watch out. You're going to have to ask a really hard question. How much work is enough? There's a lot of stuff on the internet too, and the information superhighway certainly, that's going to tempt you to waste time. There are news groups or mailing lists for every hobby you can imagine. Recreation, TV shows, collecting, you name it. It's all there. There are thousands and thousands of messages and things to browse through. It is just so tempting when you get bored. Having all that information available means that there's a certain temptation to waste time too on the job. But you know, you'd better not, because the boss just may be watching. A popular management application these days for use is on computer networks. I will call simply, this is not its real name, WinSnoop. And what it enables you to do if you're a manager is to display on your computer monitor screen what your employees are displaying on their screens. Okay, so you'd better not, if you're an employee, you'd better not be playing solitaire or writing a love letter or something of that nature, because your boss might know, and you won't know that you're being scrutinized, of course. Electronic mail, if you're an employee, is of particular concern. Electronic mail isn't private. You probably expect that it's going to be. There's no message that flashes on the screen saying, hey, just about anybody who wants to can read this message. But the chance is, according to some recent statistics, about 1 in 5 that your boss or someone in your organization is reading employees' electronic mail, and it just could be yours. In addition, those of us who've used email for a long time have learned, sometimes the hard way, that it has a tendency to be inflammatory. Poorly considered words come across in a cold, brutal way on electronic mail. You have to be especially civil and polite and considerate of other people's feelings. Uppercase letters in particular come across as shouting. Email can also get horribly out of hand, which is the problem I'm having right now. I've joined too many mailing lists, I've got too many pen pals on the internet, and I'm finding myself with about 175 new messages every morning to get through. At some point, you have to decide how much is enough. Email also can be a little bit risky if you haven't mastered all of the commands. For example, with electronic mail, it's possible to send a message to just one person, or to a collection of people, or even to the entire organization. And there are a number of stories of people who have written what they thought were very private electronic mail messages that wound up on the screens of every single person in the entire organization the next morning. Still, learning all you can about networking and the internet is one of the best things you can do to foster your career and professional growth. A few good rules to follow. Get on the internet and learn how to use it. Learn the rules of online etiquette. Learn how and where to ask for information. And most of all, give something back. Certainly you've got something that you can contribute. Keep in touch. Form one of these virtual communities for yourself. Find out who in your organization has kindred interests and learn how to share information across those hierarchical boundaries. But perhaps most of all, for your own protection, keep your electronic communication squeaky clean. Here's a couple of rules to follow. Would you want someone to do it to you? Watch out for what they call flaming, losing your temper, and shouting at somebody with uppercase letters in electronic mail. Would your public relations department want to use your electronic mail communications to show the public what great work your company is doing? Would you want it published in the newsletter, in the newspaper rather, after you get nominated for Attorney General? And perhaps the best rule of all, and finally, would you show it to your mother? Paul?
Thanks, Brian. Brian, I thought it was illegal for bosses and other people to read our electronic mail. Why don't the same rules that apply to paper mail apply to electronic mail?
It's perfectly legal for your boss to read your electronic mail, Paul. There's no federal law that prevents your employer from accessing stored electronic messages. In fact, in 74% of 300 surveyed companies, electronic mail monitoring was considered routine. It's just important to remember that democracy does stop at the door of a corporation. Most business owners do feel that although Americans have the right to free speech, you don't have the right to use someone else's property for free speech, and they have a right to know what's going on.
So the employment relationship is very important.
Absolutely. Still, there's a reasonable expectation that all of us have that our email communications are indeed going to be private. In the past, the Supreme Court has ruled that where such a reasonable expectation of privacy exists, then privacy regulations really ought to apply. And hopefully in the future this is going to get clarified.
Well, is it easy for me if I send a message I regret to get it back?
Absolutely not. And if you've used electronic mail, you'll realize that once you press that enter key, those electrons are going to fly off into the void, and there's absolutely no way you can recover them. Think twice before you hit that big key and send it off.
And if I delete an electronic mail message, can I rest assured that other people will never see it?
Well, Paul, that's what Oliver North thought.
Oh, really?
After he had deleted a great deal of his electronic mail messages pertinent to the Iran-Contra affair. But in fact, there's a big backup tape somewhere in the computer system's basement that contains a record of all of the electronic mail messages that you've sent and received. And they can be retrieved and read.
All right. Well, that sort of worries me, but maybe we can follow up on that. If any of you out there in the teleconference, again, if you have any questions about the workplace, any specific circumstances you've faced or that you know about that you'd like us to talk about, get them to us. I'm sure Brian would like to take the lead on addressing them. Our next guide today is Don Lindberg from the National Library of Medicine. Don?
Thank you, Paul. It's my job to insert into this very interesting conversation some consideration of health care. That's the area that I want to cover for you first. The first thing I think to remember is that healthcare and medicine is important. Nobody thinks more so that than I, but it really is part of the major changes that are occurring in information technology. And for that reason, I think I'll kind of telegraph you my message right at the beginning. I think that the best strategy for those who are interested in improving the quality of life in the community, electronic or otherwise, is get connected to internet to begin with. Start applications actually working. And then I would give a little preachment. I'd say concentrate quite a bit on evaluating the effects of these applications, because all of these matters aren't going to be resolved by simply theory. They're going to be resolved by practical experience. And please, for heaven's sake, report to the world the results of this evaluation. Now, one of the reasons I say that medicine, we realize, is a part of the bigger change is that there is a high-performance computing and communications program in our federal government, some 12 federal agencies, and I had the privilege of heading the national office of that for a couple of 2.5 years. That was supported, of course, in fact, by Rick Boucher and a number of others. And it's not a partisan program. It was, in fact, written by Al Gore when he was in the Senate. It was endorsed with great enthusiasm by President Bush. And so it's an interesting program. It involves, as I say, 12 agencies. And it oriented this initial program around grand challenges, things that were of great importance socially but required huge amounts of computing and communications to carry forward. Examples are galaxy formation, weather prediction, global change and climate, and so forth. The second phase of that work is what we call a national information infrastructure. Some people call it the electronic highway. I think we're talking about that type of thing today. And it introduced really two new considerations. One, that there should be a commitment to a national infrastructure, and secondly, that in order to get there, we have to have applications. This, too, is endorsed by bills that Congressman Boucher and others have put forward. Now, in all of those bills, the applications have included amongst the first 3 or 4 healthcare. The others are education and lifelong learning, digital libraries, advanced manufacturing, and other meritorious social goals. Let me skip for a moment to the role of the National Library of Medicine in support of these national objectives. We do, of course, the work of traditional library functions, but plus a lot more. Access to worlds of information through internet. We use commercial networks. We use internet. We avail ourselves of a network of national libraries of medicine, some 4,300 throughout the United States. We are supporting both research work within the library and extramural research grants. And the first category is a system called Unified Medical Language System. We try to create a terminology that will allow all of us to find information wherever it is, regardless of the word we choose, because it'll understand at least the medical meaning of terms, not general meaning. And then the visible human is a 3-dimensional full voxel representation of an adult male and, to come, an adult female. The grants provide help for a number of ways to connect to internet, but I think the most important for this audience to focus on for the moment is telemedicine, to practice medicine at a distance. And that involves 3 things. It involves providing information that supports medical decision making. Secondly, it involves, I'll call it signal processing. Those signals could be blood pressure, pulse, they could be images, the picture of a person on TV. And a third thing, which is the most important of all, and I think the previous speakers have emphasized that also, it involves arrangements between people and institutions that allow you to practice medicine at a distance. So that, for instance, take into account licensing and accreditation, malpractice insurance, that take into account assuring privacy of the communication, a number of what we'll call public policy matters that I think are well known to probably to your audience. Now, in the end, we NLM concentrate on information. Primarily in the past 150 years, it's been to serve the public through the healthcare practitioners. This I'll just give a few examples of. Researching the medical literature, providing clinical practice guidelines. In recent years, we've had the courage to try to serve the needs of patients and families. Now that's more difficult. Of course, there are obviously more, if you will, people than there are doctors, but the public is much larger in number than any subset of it, and it's much harder to say things for even an educated public than it is for a set of adepts. But so our experiments are taking the form of information for patients about clinical cancer protocols, in which there's a formal section for the patient, for the doctor. Either, of course, can go either place, but at least it's carefully said by medical science writers for the public. Clinical practice guidelines, which are likewise set up with a formal section for the patient, section for the physician or the healthcare practitioner. Then in the area of AIDS information, all of our AIDS information is really designed for public consumption. All of it is free, because it would be foolish to have it any other way. And then a fourth area of toxicology in the environment, which is very, very important, but probably the most difficult of all for us to handle, because its concepts are rather chemical. And yet, communities do have a great interest in knowing about toxic spills, where they've occurred, and how to handle them, and to what extent they have a liability, a danger. In closing, I would point out that, in my view at least, the grand challenge for the United States, if there were any body that were anointed and authorized to make that list, but if I were on it, I would say the grand challenge really is lifelong learning. We have to have a way to work adult learning. Even the schools are important, but the schools are in better shape than the adult population. There's no way, no really systematic way. In medicine, we call it continuing medical education. All healthcare professionals, all doctors anyway, kind of make fun of it, and we don't think we do a good job, and yet other professions think we do a better job than they. So there's a tremendous opportunity, it seems to me, in the electronic village and the connections and the high-performance computing for us to find a way for adults to continue to learn, for retread, if necessary, to the new jobs that are coming. We can see many, many people who have 2 or 3 careers. In thinking that through, I mean, every member of the community in your audience has a role to play in that. In thinking that through, I just ask that you separate a little bit the idea of information retrieval, which we do really pretty well, from gaining understanding, because we don't know how to do that with a machine assistance very well at all. We can, for instance, retrieve let's say, the correct dose of a drug to give a patient. But if we don't understand the real mechanism of the disease, let's say it's a molecular biology disease, and the doctor simply didn't have an education in that, he would have to take time to come to understand it. And we don't know really how well to use machines to do that. That is a classroom teacher-student thing. Whereas the simpler matter of information retrieval, even diagnostic assistance, we do know how to do, and I think that's a reasonable expectation for you all in your electronic village of the future.
Thanks a lot, Don. Don, while you were talking, I was thinking about, if I have access to electronic resources of medical information that previously only physicians had access to for one reason or another, to what degree will I be able to become my own doctor?
Well, not a sufficient degree. Actually, most in the medical profession are very strongly in favor of providing information to patients. I mean, I think we know that in the case of chronic illness, patient education is probably the best thing we do for the patient. So I don't think there's anyone resisting that. The activated patient is probably the last frontier. Think, for example, of the business of taking or not taking medications, doing or not doing the exercises. I mean, who's deciding that? We as the patients are deciding that, not as doctors. Think about the disgracefully low level of immunization in our children. I mean, that's a family and a community issue. That's not a doctor issue. So we're in favor of you getting all the information you can through the internet or otherwise.
So short term, the major effect will be able to give family members better information to nag the family members, the people in their family who aren't doing the right thing with their medications.
Sure, or the patient understand the real nature of the illness.
Yes, that'll be very helpful. Thanks very much. We have 2 guides for the 4th segment of our program here today. First is Congressman Rick Boucher, who's been kind enough to make a tape for us since he couldn't be here today. And then we'll be able to dialogue with Joe Shoemaker, his Deputy Chief of Staff. and Joe will be here for the rest of the day. Congressman Boucher would like to give us some of his thoughts on government initiatives in this area, and then Joe and I will talk a little bit about the changing relationship between elected officials and those who elect them. So let's go to the videotape, and it'll be Congressman Boucher.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's Choices and Challenges Forum. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be with you in person this afternoon, but the press of legislative business currently before Congress requires my continued presence in Washington. I am, however, pleased to contribute by electronic means to today's discussion of the quality of life in the electronic village. I'm tremendously impressed with the work of the Blacksburg Electronic Village, which is assuring that the residents of this community have access to a rich array of information services well in advance of their availability in other communities. Much will be learned from the Blacksburg experience in terms of which services consumers want, how they want them delivered, and what they're willing to pay for each service. That knowledge will facilitate the introduction of information services nationwide. We're taking steps at the federal level to realize the benefits for the nation of an advanced information infrastructure. And while the national media has devoted significant attention to the general subject, a great deal of confusion still surrounds this much heralded information superhighway, especially concerning the respective roles of the public and private sectors in its ownership and deployment. Questions remain in the public mind concerning just what role the federal government should play. In the next few minutes, I'll seek to define an appropriate role for the federal government and suggest specific legislative approaches which, when taken together, would constitute a roadmap to the information highway. The federal government should not own, deploy, control, or manage the nation's information infrastructure. The physical network, including fiber optic lines, high-speed switches, and associated software, should be deployed, owned, and controlled by the private sector. The federal government's role should consist of the following steps. First, the government should assure that the network is fully interoperable for the digital transmission of voice, video, and data seamlessly throughout the nation. Both wired and wireless means of data delivery should be accommodated through a government-initiated standard-setting process. Secondly, the government should provide research and development funding for the creation and demonstration of new networking technologies. Our immediate goal is a 20-fold increase in the speed of network performance. From the current level of 45 million bits per second, that level of performance would enable very swift transmission of large volumes of material. A file equal in size to the Encyclopedia Britannica could be easily transferred in about 1 second at gigabit speed. To achieve that increase in network performance, a new generation of switches and software will be required. The federal government should provide research and development funding for that undertaking. The government should also create a testbed network in which the new technologies, once developed, can be demonstrated. The third role for the federal government is to remove outdated restrictions on communications companies, which serve as a major disincentive to private sector network investment. To give private industry sufficient economic incentive to deploy fiber optic lines and other broadband technology, providing network access to homes, businesses, schools, and research laboratories throughout the nation, Congress should eliminate these restrictions. As a means of fulfilling the federal government's role, encouraging the development of the world's most capable information network, these things should therefore be done. We should pass legislation carrying forward the government's role in standard setting and research and development for new networking technologies. And we should enact comprehensive law reform to provide full competition in the markets for cable television service, telephone service, and high-end manufacturing equipment. The financial incentives and new innovation which will flow from these changes will fulfill the nation's vision for an advanced information infrastructure. I appreciate very much this opportunity to share these views with you, and I leave you now with best wishes for a successful conference.
Thank you, Congressman Boucher, wherever you may be today. Doing the nation's business, I'm sure. Joe, you're a congressional staffer and have been for some time. Has this use of electronic mail, for instance, I've heard about the Thomas system and how many Congressman, are now available online. Has this use of electronic mail had any short-term effects already?
Paul, that's a tough one because it's a double-edged sword. The short-term effects have been, I think, in two areas, the physical and the expectation. And the expectation, I think, on the part of the public is that this faster medium, this easier medium of access will allow more participation, more rapid response from their elected officials. And I have friends, and I consult with people on the state level and at the local level as well who are experiencing some of these same things. And their governmental structures, as the national governmental structure, isn't necessarily set up to respond in a rapid, quick, immediate way. And I think that there's the danger that leads to more frustration. I think one of the things that Steve said in his talk in the H.G. Wells Credible City scenario is, people get frustrated by delays of clogged streets, dusty roads, and a slow turnaround. And I think that may be some of the case that we're seeing with people getting frustrated about not getting an instant response. For example, in our office, we respond by snail mail. We don't email people who email us back. There are two reasons for that, and I can go into those in more detail later, but I think people are surprised, and they get an automatic response. We have an automatic throw when they get an email message comes back to them and says, please include your street address so that we can send you mail. And if you don't do that, realize you're not going to get a response. So I think it cuts both ways.
Thanks, Joe. This is a very fascinating set of subjects, government access and accountability, and how the electronic village will be different from the villages we all know. So feel free to get those questions warmed up and on their way to us on this very interesting area about what the government is doing, what the government should be doing, and how government will change in the electronic village. Our fifth guide is Deborah Johnson. Deborah.
Thank you. We've now heard quite a bit about the different contexts that are going on in the electronic village, online, on the internet, and we've heard about education and work and government and healthcare. And what I would like to do is draw our attention to the character and quality of social life in the electronic village, or social life online. What I really want to do, since there has been so much publicity and so much discussion of the promises and hopes of this new technology, I want to sort of counter the hype a little bit by pulling us down to earth and reminding us that the activities that go on in the electronic village very much reflect the kind of people that we are and the activities that we've done in the past and been doing, that continue to do. And the shape of the electronic village will really be rooted in who we are and what kind of people we are and what we value and the activities we're now engaging in, what we care about. And in that respect, I want to suggest that in some sense we have here a solution without serious problems, or in this respect, that I think that this new technology will change our lives, but it's not clear to me that it will solve our most serious and pressing problems. And so I want to point out that the evolution of this technology has not been without problems, and I want to suggest to you that the problems that have been developed or that we've witnessed online are really the same problems that we have offline. In particular, I want to draw our attention to the problems of the fact that there is theft that goes online, there's vandalism, there's all kinds of criminal activity, there's snooping, there's harassing, there's defamation. There was a recent case which many of you probably read about in Michigan of someone actually threatening the life of someone else online. There is a kind of amusing case of an electronic rape online. And there are also enormous potentials for terrorism, for espionage, for the seamy side of life. There are pedophiles, there's pornography, etc. I hate to be the sort of negative person on this technology, but I think we have to recognize that in order to develop, to shape this technology into a pleasant village, into the kind of village that we want to live in, we're going to have to come to grips with those problems, and they're not going to be easy. I also want to suggest that there are some differences between these kinds of behaviors committed online and these kinds of behaviors committed offline. In particular, I want to draw attention to two characteristics. The first one is anonymity. People who engage in socially undesirable behavior online are often able to maintain their anonymity, that is, and often they actually have pseudonymity, that is, that they take on identities that aren't their real identities. And anonymity, in certain contexts, I think has positive values, that is, people are much freer to say things that they wouldn't say otherwise, which it's good to have them say. But at the same time, anonymity seems to free people to behave in ways that they wouldn't behave in if we saw them face to face, if we knew who they were. Anonymity also, as is probably obvious, makes it very difficult to track down and catch people who engage in undesirable behavior. The second characteristic I want to point out is increased scope, and really what I mean by that is power. That is, people who engage in this kind of antisocial behavior online are able to do much more powerful acts. So in other words, if I say something libelous against someone online, I'm able to spread that information, that false information, across the world very quickly and very easily. In general, any kind of act is more powerful in the sense that I can reach much farther, and it's with much simpler physical behaviors. So we're going to have to deal with those characteristics of the electronic village. And I also have to draw attention to the fact that one of the big issues that we'll have to address is freedom of speech, because these are issues that have already arisen, and we're going to have to worry both about freedom of speech in the sense that there are some things that we don't want people to say. That is, we don't want them to libel us or slander us. We don't want our children exposed to pornography and obscenity, that at least we want to be able to control that. At the same time, we also have to worry about the government reacting to those situations with sort of coming down too hard and making the electronic village a place in which you really don't have freedom of speech, in the sense that everything that you're saying is being observed by the government. It's a tough one. It's a really complex issue. It's enormously complex offline, and it becomes even more complex online. The other thing I would like to do is sort of really play on the metaphor of the village. I think we have to remember that villages are complex and diverse places, that in physical geographic villages we have a variety of public and private spaces. We have the public square, and we have streets which are considered public, and anything that you do there, you wouldn't be surprised at being observed. Also in geographic villages, we have private spaces. We have homes, and we have rooms in those homes in which we expect other people not to be watching us or observing what we're saying. And then we have a whole range of sort of places that are in between these extremes of public and private. We have workplaces. We have government offices and courts, which have different standards of behavior. We have churches, we have stores, our businesses, etc. And one of the big issues will be trying to seeing whether or not we can have that variety in the electronic village, or whether we will make the mistake and make the space entirely public or entirely private. That is a real challenge. The government will certainly be pressures on the government to try to define the space as public everywhere, public in the sense that the government wants to be able to observe everything so that they can control the antisocial and undesirable behavior. We will probably be able to get some degree of privacy by using encryption techniques to encrypt our messages to one another, or in data and information. But whether or not the encryption techniques that we use will all be able to be decrypted by the government or someone else will be a big issue. Finally, I just want to say we ought to worry in terms of the quality of life about what the electronic village will do to our geographic and three-dimensional physical villages, because I think the more and more we spend time communicating with people online means less and less time spent with people who are living geographically close to us. I'm sort of concerned that our identities and who we are and our alliances will become stronger and stronger with those people who we communicate with who are physically distant, but who we have lots in common with, and we'll have less and less to do with people who are living next door, less and less investment in what's happening to our geographical, physical villages.
Thanks, Deborah. While you were talking, I was thinking of something that's quite different between these two types of villages, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. In geographic villages, particularly children, but all of us really, we meet each other physically, and after we get to know each other physically, we get to know each other's interests and beliefs and opinions. It's my impression that in electronic villages, people tend to meet each other through their interest, opinions, beliefs, and then later, and in many cases never at all, they meet each other physically. This is just a difference between the two types of villages. Do you think they work against each other, or do they work for each other? Do you have any comments?
I don't know about them working for or against each other. I think that we're ambivalent about those differences in the sense that I think our values often suggest that what's important about us is not our physical characteristics, but our ideas, our minds, our thoughts. And so we're able to share those online. And so many people believe that we can have the same quality, equally, maybe more valuable relationships online than offline, in the sense that physical appearance, race, gender, class can be eliminated from the environment if we don't have video hookups with our computers. But at the same time, if I can refer back to my mention of anonymity, the bottom line test for identity is seeing a person face to face. So not having that face-to-face physical presence of one another opens the door to all kinds of deception and fraud and miscuing. I may think I'm communicating with the same person I communicated yesterday and not be. I may think I'm communicating with 3 different people when actually it's the same person playing different games. That seems to me to make a big difference. It will be partly alleviated when we have video hookups with our computer hookups, but I think then we'll also have the possibility of people disguising themselves via video. That is, I have an image come up instead of my image.
Yeah, that's a mind-boggling prospect. This is the, I think this is frequently referred to as the no one knows you're a dog in cyberspace problem. So thank you for your thoughts on that, and get those questions warmed up. There's a lot of material here. Our 6th guide and our closing presenter in our opening session here is Mark Rotenberg. Mark?
Thank you. Steve Acker mentioned earlier today that 1994 was remarkable because for the first time in history, the sale of personal computers surpassed the sale of color televisions. 1994 was remarkable for another reason. For the first time in history, a majority of Americans, in response to a public opinion poll, said that they were very concerned about privacy. In fact, 84% of Americans said they were concerned about privacy when the Lou Harris organization asked, "What are your feelings toward privacy?" It is perhaps not surprising that as our country has raced forward with new technologies, so too have our concerns about privacy grown greater. Technologies have a voracious appetite for personal information. Everything you say, every place you go, every word you write can now be easily recorded and stored and used at a later point in time. And so for this reason, we have one of the greatest challenges facing us in this new age of digital information. What exactly is privacy? It's a question that's not easy to answer. Philosophers speak sometimes of autonomy, the sense of personhood, or perhaps individuality. My own view of privacy is a highly dynamic one. I think each day we experience both private life and public life. We are here together this afternoon to talk publicly about our views of the electronic village. Later today, we will be at home with our friends and our families and have private life, where we share our thoughts and our secrets with close friends. In many ways, the electronic world that is growing up around us shares these same attributes. We can speak publicly on an electronic bulletin board. We can express the most ferocious opinion about a political issue that other people, the denizens of cyberspace, may care about. And at the same time, we communicate privately. We send messages about particular issues, about sensitive topics, about things that we would want perhaps just a few people to know, to selected recipients of those words. And so the public and the private coexist. But it is a very difficult challenge to understand how privacy will be protected in this new information age. Consider, for example, the technology of cryptology. This is a method for encoding information. Words that you speak or words that you write can be translated into a text that no one else can read. They can go through the information pipes, come out at the other end. The person who's supposed to get the message will be able to see what you've said. But law enforcement, for example, has argued that this will frustrate the ability to conduct criminal investigation. And philosophers are equally concerned about the use of anonymity and absolute privacy to frustrate accountability and public responsibility. And so we have difficult choices to make with issues such as privacy. What type of technologies will we permit? What type of laws will we pass? I am of the view that we're going to have to struggle with this issue for quite some time to come, because I believe we are at the beginning of a process. We are just today taking our first steps into these electronic pools, these electronic communities. We are seeing the early stages of formation and the early development when electronic messaging becomes more important than the telephone call or than the letter. What is to be done? We need a good discussion, a careful discussion that looks closely at our political history and our legal history. You know, the framers of our Constitution, who wrote in the 18th century about the rights of man and the rights of citizens, understood that individuals, to participate freely in political life, would need certain inalienable rights: the right to speak freely without restriction, the right to have private thought and private belief, the right to be secure in one's home. These values of the 18th century will no doubt be just as important in the 21st. But how are we going to protect them? The Constitution doesn't give us easy answers. And so I suspect what we will need to do is join together, work together, to come up with solutions to protect what has been described by some as the most comprehensive of all rights, and that is the right of privacy.
Thanks, Mark. Do we think of privacy in the United States the way people around the world think about privacy, or are there big differences there? I ask because we've been talking about it in a national context, but in point of fact, these networks are going to be global, and I'm interested whether we in the United States think the same way about privacy as, say, like people in Europe or South Asia, or could you give us some input on that?
Yeah, I think we have different traditions. We have different laws, certainly, and different cultural expectations. But the concept of privacy is universal, particularly when you look at communications. People understand a sealed letter. They understand, the seal on parchment, going back before, in the early days of communication. And as global networks stretch from country to country, the need to protect the privacy of information grows. So I think it's a universal concept, though maybe we express it differently.
Good. Thank you for that. Well, there you go, everyone. We're about ready to take a 15-minute break. We've heard from Mark and the other panelists. I hope you've gotten the impression that the information highway is not about Hollywood. It's not about home shopping. It's about schooling. It's about working. It's about lifelong learning. It's about health and wellness. It's about the nature of our society. It's about our fundamental rights and responsibilities. So give some thought to that and get your questions to us over the next 15 minutes or throughout the session that will follow. The toll-free number is 1-800-222-9703. The fax number is 1-703-231-3746. And the email ID is choices@vt.edu. That's choices, C-H-O-I-C-E-S, @vt.edu. So let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll all be back here at 10 to the hour.